Alrighty, it says after 7, I'd like to call the meeting to order. My commission meeting on. We take the roll call.
Commissioner DeBoer,
Present.
Commissioner McCarthy,
Present.
Commissioner Whiteley,
Here.
Commissioner Credence,
Present.
Chair Marson.
Present. Next is the approval of prior meeting minutes from May 5th. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes?
Move to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Lauren,
Who was that second?
Mr. Creed.
Okay, thank you.
call the roll.
Commissioner DeBoer,
Yes.
Commissioner McCarthy,
Yes.
Commissioner Whiteley,
Present.
Commissioner Credence,
Yes.
Chair Marson.
Yes.
Were you present at the last meeting, Commissioner Whiteley? Were you present?
Yeah,
You can vote yes or no. You voted present.
I was giving these guys a charge. When all of a sudden so formal.
He was here.
Yes, I approve.
Okay.
I was here.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Okay, tonight we have public hearings on 2 amendments to the code. I'll read them out here. It's PC 2021-05. We have a proposed amendment to Chapter 1222, Official Village Comprehensive Plan of the Village Code to revise the comprehensive plan adopted on December 7, 2009, and to add the Western Growth Area Master Plan Design and Development Guidelines as an official document. Next, we have PC 2021-06, a proposed amendment to Title VI zoning to replace 1273 S-1 Plan Unit Development District repeal with a new chapter 1273 WGA PUD Western Growth Area Plan Unit Development District. First, I'm going to have Lauren make a more detailed presentation of both of these amendments. And John House will make a presentation, and then we'll open it up to a public hearing.
With the recent annexation of Cod Hill, Mid-Iron Golf Club, and Ludwig Farms, it is anticipated that the village will begin to experience development pressure within the foreseeable future. The village recently adopted an amendment to the comprehensive plan to incorporate the Western Growth Area Master Plan, which provides land use recommendations for the recently annexed area. And following adoption, the master plan recommended a number of next steps, 2 of which were the adoption of the development and design guidelines, which will guide the development of plans for this area, subdivision plans, and the architecture for the area, establish a level of expectation for development in the area. As well, it also recommended the adoption of a specific plan unit development ordinance that would only be used for development in that area and would regulate the development within that area. As such, I'm going to turn the presentation over now to John Housiel, the village's consultant for preparation of these documents.
All right, thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. Again, for the record, my name is John Housiel with Housiel Levine Associates. A little bit of background, I've been assisting the village for more than 22 years with a variety of different planning, zoning, and development initiatives, projects, and applications. So I know the village very well. It holds a special place in my heart for a lot of the communities I work in because I've been here for so long and know the community so well. So to go over what the chairman and what Lauren said, this evening what we're going to be going over is the design guidelines for the Western Growth Area. And we're going to be going over the Plan Unit Development, which is the PUD Ordinance District, which is an amendment, proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance of the Village of Palos Park. So what this is, and I'll sort of reiterate this throughout the presentation, The presentation is fairly concise. It's a very specific component we're talking about this evening. And the plan that was adopted a little over a year ago, about 14 months ago, for the Western Growth Area, the proposed design guidelines for the Western Growth Area, and the proposed Western Growth Area Plan Unit Development Ordinance District only pertains to the Western Growth Area. It doesn't pertain to any other R1A, R2, any other zoning in Old Palos or any of the areas to the east or the established areas. This is only for, and only has jurisdiction for the areas that were mentioned that were annexed, being Mid-Iron, Ludwig Farm, and Codgill. So it only pertains to that, not any other part of the village. So with that, I'm going to jump into this, and what I'll do is I'll go through the whole thing, and then once I've gone through it, we'll be able to then open it up to questions. I'll turn it back over to the chairman. I did bring, after I go through it, if anybody wants to come up and look afterwards, I brought a few different things. You can see behind you on the boards, those are open house boards from the plan when it was adopted about 14 months ago, the Western Growth Area Master Plan. I also have copies, and I'll put them on the table up here, copies of the proposed ordinance that I'm going to be reviewing this evening. A hard copy of the Western Growth Area Plan that was adopted 14 months ago. And a copy of the Design and Development Guidelines that I'm going to be presenting this evening. So I have copies of all three documents up here. If you want to come look at them after the meeting or whatever, that's fine. They're also available online, but sometimes people like to hold them in their hands. I'm a little bit old school in that way myself. So I'm going to jump into this. Again, I laid the foundation for this a little bit in my opening comments. If at any point you can't hear me, just ask me to speak up. Usually talking loudly isn't a problem. We're really sort of talking about three documents that work in conjunction and dovetail with one another. The first one is the Western Growth Area WGA Master Plan. This is a master plan for the area that was annexed out west. The board you see behind you, this was adopted, I believe, in February, so about 14 months ago or so. That was about a year-long process to get to that plan. There were a series of open houses, there were online questionnaires and surveys, there were public hearings before it was considered. A recommendation was made by the Planning Commission after a public hearing. The recommendation then went to the village, and then the Village Council Commission adopted it. So that plan is now in place. The precursor to that plan is the village's comprehensive plan. In every state, there is enabling legislation, which gives authority to and requirements of municipalities to adopt a comprehensive plan. So the authority comes from the state of Illinois. Every state has this for all cities. The comprehensive plan is a long-range plan for the community. And in that document, which is done about 10 years ago or so, 10 or 14 years ago, I can't remember exactly when the comprehensive plan was done, the Western Growth Area at that time was just an idea. It wasn't annexed. The village did not have jurisdiction over it. So in that comprehensive plan from a decade ago, that area in that plan was just hatched red. And it was called the Western Growth Area. Then it said at some future date, if the village grows into this area, you need to adopt a plan for this area. So the plan a decade ago called out the need for this. And a few years ago, the area was annexed. So with the plan being adopted 14 months ago, when the plan was adopted, there were two recommendations in that plan in addition to the other components of the plan. One was to establish design and development guidelines to ensure the quality and character of any development that did take place was consistent with the integrity and high caliber of architecture and character of community that Palos Park had. And the other part of the plan recommendations was to do a planned unit development or PUD district, and that was to amend your zoning code. So the plan is policy, it's guidance, it is not regulatory. The guidelines are just that, they're guidelines. They help inform decision making, they guide what development may come forth and what it might look like. The district is zoning, that is regulatory. So the first two documents, the one that was adopted 14 months ago was policy. The one that we're talking about this evening, the guidelines, is just that, it's just to guide the developer, the staff, the plan commission, the elected officials. And the PU district is the regulations, the zoning through which entitlement can occur, the processes, the standards to review, the application requirements, that technical piece. So these are the three pieces they work in tandem. Again, plan is adopted, we're working on the other two tonight. We've been working on it for a long time. The design guidelines, the purpose of this are intended to support and strengthen land use and development recommendations found within the Western Growth Area Master Plan, so not any other part of the village. The design guidelines are not intended to dictate architecture. They don't say what buildings or homes have to look like. They don't dictate what materials have to be or what architectural style has to be used. But it uses a threshold of design material orientation. So it reinforces the desired character and identity of the village. It promotes development that complements the character. It ensures high quality building and site design, including materials and site amenities. It establishes a development pattern that is in harmony with the natural environment. There's a lot of water features over there, a lot of mature stands of trees over there, some topography over there. We want to ensure that any development is consistent with and integrates with the natural environment as opposed to wiping it out and building sort of like scratch dirt. And then to foster development that respects pedestrian and bicycle activity while accommodating vehicular traffic. So you have to be able to access it by car and drive around by car, but we want to create environments where you can walk and bike and get around without having to drive long distances. We want to create that sort of an active transportation network. So these are the objectives that drove the design guidelines. The content of the design guidelines document, and I'm going to go through a PDF of this on here. This is just an outline. Was the purpose, which I just went through. It's broken into a section for residential design guidelines, another section for commercial design guidelines. In the commercial design guidelines, there's really 4 pieces. There's those guidelines that affect all commercial, and then there's specific guidelines for 3 different commercial areas: Archer Avenue and Mid-Iron, this golf course resort sort of center, and then a business park. And then the appendix just references back to a map that you'll see back there of the land use plan. So the residential design guidelines address these elements. And this is just an outline. I'm going to go through the document in a little bit. So the elements talk about architectural style and monotony. We've all driven through these communities where it's the same home duplicated 100 times. You know, you drive down the street and you don't, every house looks exactly the same, and it's just monotonous. And we have standards in here to prevent any of that from happening here. So it'll be a very intriguing community. Building orientation and setback, senior housing, building orientation and setback is also driven through these developments where it just looks like a series of garage doors, where the garages are stuck on the front of the homes, and all you see is garage door, garage door, garage door, garage door. It doesn't really evoke neighborhood or community, as opposed to homes that have nice front porches, nice lawns. It's a totally different type of feel. So we talk about building orientation. We address some standards for senior housing, building material and color, the quality you expect, massing, facades, entrances and windows. We've also seen these developments where the front has a thin veneer of brick, and then you drive around the corner and you see a side of a house with no windows. And we've seen communities like that. So we wanted to take a look at how solar panels could be accommodated in development, garage access, driveways, lighting, configuration of blocks, landscaping, and then environmental features. So we have standards for all of these. And the reason we do this is so when a development is proposed, and right now there is no proposed development. So I just want to make that clear. There's nothing pending right now. Village isn't aware of any, I'm not aware of any, nothing's been applied for. But if someone comes forward with a development, let's say it's a residential development, staff, the developer, plan commission, and the elected officials will all have these guidelines and the plan, and they will be able to say, okay, you know, Mr. Developer, is what you're proposing consistent with our design guidelines? Do you have homes that are not monotonous? Are you incorporating the natural environment? Are you using high quality materials? Is the orientation of buildings what they should be? Is your use of landscaping providing a lush green environment instead of just no open space? So these guidelines will be used to help evaluate proposals when they do come forward. Not that any have been yet. The commercial design guidelines, and again, I'll go through this in a bit, these are the general design guidelines. We have detailed design guidelines for, again, for materials and architecture, access and circulation. A little bit different when you get to access, parking, loading, than residential, because you have to have places for, you have parking fields, parking lots, and in residential you typically don't have it. Roof lines, lighting, signage, landscaping, and then stormwater and low impact or environmental design. So one of the detailed recommendation areas we have is for Archer Avenue and Mid-Iron. These are designated commercial areas in the plan that are on major roadway corridors. So they have to be a bit more accommodating automobiles, they're larger pieces of property, a bit more auto-oriented commercial areas, but still high quality nonetheless. So we have standards and guidelines just for these areas. There's another area that I'll talk about a little bit. It's the golf course resort or town center area. I'm gonna go back and grab the board in the back real fast. So you can walk around and look at this in the back when you're done. I'll sort of prop it up here if you want to sort of, hopefully this won't block anybody's view. You guys, does it block anybody's view? You said. Okay. So, and hopefully you can still hear me without me standing at the mic, but I just want to point out a couple of things. They're recording, so I'll talk. When I talk about the Archer Avenue and the Mid-Iron site, commercial sites, I'm talking about the site on Archer Avenue here, this red area, and this is where Mid-Iron is right now. All right? When I talk about this golf course resort town center, it's where Cog Hills Clubhouse is now. It's in the middle of their campus, all right? They will likely be reconfiguring, it'll still be a golf course, they'll be reconfiguring the golf course, moving things around. But we have an area around their clubhouse as sort of a town center, pedestrian, high-end shops, boutiques, restaurants, that sort of a commercial area in the middle. The other area that is commercial, potentially it's also, could be commercial business park, could be residential. It's appropriate for both. And it's a triangular area right up here, sort of pinched in between Archer and the big ComEd easement. There's a large area up there that we've identified in the plan as potentially being home for sort of a nicely landscaped office or business park. It would be highly compatible with any nearby open space areas or natural environment and any nearby residential as well. So we've got some standards in here for a business park office as well, and I'll go through that. The next piece, and again, I'll go through that, the PDF of the document. The next piece is the Planned Unit Development District. Everybody lives in Palos Park or any place else except for Houston has a zoning for their property, okay? A lot of people, if you have a 1 acre property, typical single family detached in Palos Park, it's R1A, I believe, right? And there's certain standards, how big your house can be, what the setbacks have to be, how big your property has to be. All the commercial properties, so over there on the Grange Road where the shopping center is in Walgreen, there's zoning that governs all properties. And some development is done through a PUD, a Planned Unit Development District. Anything done via a PUD is not done as of right. And let me explain what this means. If you have a piece of property in R1A, and it's a vacant piece of property, and you want to build a house, you have someone draw up plans, and you come in with your plans. If it complies with zoning, it meets the height, meets the setbacks, meets the area, everything is complied, check, 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 they give you a building permit. It's called as of right. You have the right to do it because you meet all the conditions. In a PUD district, there is no as of right. All right, there's no surprises. Everything has to be approved via public hearing. Public notice goes out, residents get notified, staff reviews it, there's a report. The report is going to address all the design guidelines I just mentioned and all the plan recommendations. That public hearing will then be held with this group to review it, ask questions, let residents speak. A recommendation will ultimately be formed either for or against or with modifications. That recommendation will go to the elected officials and they'll decide vote up, vote down. Anything in the PED district has to go through that public process. Everything in the western growth area has to go through that public hearing process. So you're not going to drive out there one day and say, man, how did that get approved to come out of the ground? You will have known how it got approved or what the process was. So the purpose of the Western Growth Area Planned Unit Development District is to provide locations for commercial, employment, and diverse housing options that are integrated with extensive network of preserved open space, foster a strong sense of place and a high quality of development in keeping with the core values of the village as detailed in the Western Growth Area Master Plan. At the beginning of the plan document, before we do anything else, it says, these are the core values of this community. Any development is going to have to be consistent with these values. It talks about high quality, it talks about open space in the natural environment, et cetera, et cetera. So those values are in the plan. The PUD refers back to having to meet those values. Procedurally, when someone submits this, and this will all be available for public review, they have to submit all of these items when they're first even just thinking of the development. So they've got to come up with a preliminary approval or a tentative sketch of the area, topography, streets, utilities, how infrastructure is going to work, square footage of any residential building, how many units it's going to be, what it's going to look like. I'm not going to go through the whole list. Natural resources inventory, they have to identify all the natural resources, the trees, the waterways, the soil, the wetland. All this has to be sort of pulled together. Traffic, stormwater. They have to get preliminary approval of the concept by the village. Okay, before they do and spend the money on super detailed architectural drawings and all that stuff, they have to have the concept approved. But in order to get the concept approved, they have to come with at least a preliminary level of all of this stuff, okay, for any development. Formal petition, again, a filing fee, the petition for the plan development, there's a legal notice that goes out in the community, it's reviewed by staff to make sure it's a 100% complete application, that nothing is missing. The clerk will forward a copy to the mayor and to the council. It'll go to the plan commission for public hearing. The plan commission makes a finding and then will give a report to council. Then council will either approve, deny, whatever. If they approve it, then the development can then go forward. They can get the permits and they can be platted. The contents for formal petition are this. This is more detailed plans, more finalized plans based off the concept approval. And again, roads, streets, alleys, sidewalks, infrastructure, stormwater, natural resources, lighting, streets, everything has to be detailed. And when the hammer comes down, if they're lucky enough to get approval, it's not just a verbal approval. What gets approved is a packet of information, with all of that information. Engineering plans, natural resource plans, architectural plans, etc. So when it gets approved, you know exactly what's going to be coming out of the ground. Exactly. Where, how, what it's going to look like. And this is all the material that's required as part of the application. This is, before I go any further, very typical process that you see in communities all across the United States. This is not unique to Palos Park. Developers are used to this. What developers want is fair certainty. They want to know what to expect when they come to Palos Park. They don't care if you have a high bar. They want to know what the bar is. They don't want to be surprised. This establishes a high bar, but it's fair, it's reasonable, and good developers expect it. So I think that's very important. This is not an onerous set of regulations. It's a high bar with a high quality and a high expectation, more than most communities, but it's fair and consistent. So they have to demonstrate all this as part of their thing. Then when it goes to final preparation, final plat, all the common open space has to be recorded and documented. Public facilities have to, construction plans and phasing schedules. They have to say that they're not delinquent in any taxes, and they have to let the village know of any covenants or restrictions they're going to be recording with the deed once the development comes online. Like what's public, what's not public, is it a public street or private street? All this has to be recorded. So a lot of detail. I'm going to go through pretty quickly what the design guidelines look like. So that's the ordinance, that's the regulations that I just went through on how a development has to get approved. So nothing can get approved as of right. Every development in the Western Growth Area has to be approved as a planned development in this new Western Growth Area Planned Unit Development District, okay? The process is public, it's thorough, it requires public notice, public testimony, public hearing. And when those plans are reviewed and evaluated, they are evaluated with the help of the design guidelines and the plan you see behind you. So again, the document talks about the purpose of the design guidelines. This is the document you'll see up here and it's found online. So it talks about the purpose and intent of the design guidelines, the core principles of why the village is using design guidelines to ensure quality, protect open space, village character, and natural resources. The residential design guidelines begin to address all the different things. This is architectural style and monotony. It talks about what is or isn't deemed appropriate in terms of how much monotony you can have, the mix of types of buildings you can have, building orientation, setback, height. Now these guidelines will cover several different types of residential. Could be single family large lot, could be single family small lot, it could be a townhome, it could be a senior housing, it could be sort of a cottage home. We don't know what's going to be proposed. Nothing has been proposed yet. But these guidelines have applicability to every type of residential development that may be proposed, and that's how they were specifically written. So building orientation, setback and height, senior housing, have specific things in here to make sure senior housing is appropriately located with the appropriate amenities and access and mobility. Building material, color and character and quality of material. Massing of buildings and roof lines for every type of residential development. Facade design, entrances and windows. We want to make sure that the primary facade of buildings is fronting the street, they're welcoming, there's no blank facades along the rights of way. Solar panels, we would expect this to be something that's becomes more prolific as time goes on, but there's a way to do this that is attractive and almost invisible, as opposed to they've been done in some places where they're an eyesore. We like them, we just show different ways to support them. Garage access driveways, again, how to do this appropriately. Lighting, night sky is important. We don't want stuff just beaming up into the heavens to light up. Part of the attractiveness of the natural setting is the fact that at night it gets dark, and that's kind of a nice thing. So we talk about what is an appropriate lighting. Block configuration, if they're actually going to be putting in blocks into this open space or into these natural areas, what that block configuration should begin to look like as they propose larger residential, if they propose larger residential. Landscaping on an individual and campus basis, and then environmental open space, conservation, how to do stormwater, so it's done with green infrastructure, not just engineered or gray infrastructure. And then how to do a thing called conservation design. Typical design is, or development is, you go into an area, you sort of scrape it, if you will, for lack of a better term, and you develop on top of it. Conservation design is, you identify those features that are those unique attributes. Developers historically have said, these are site challenges, but if it's mature stands of trees, wetlands, creeks or rivers, steep slopes, ravines, these are things that if designed with can actually really improve the aesthetic of the environment. So conservation design prioritizes these environmental features. And if development is going to take place where these environmental features exist, they have to document them, and they have to show how they are incorporating environmental design in their approach to development of those sites. So again, those are the standards of design guidelines that have to be met and followed, and will serve as a guide to the Plan Commission elected officials. Likewise, for the commercial, I'll go through this a little bit more quickly. Same thing for commercial. We talk about building materials, architecture. We talk about pedestrian crosswalks, what parking lots or screening should look like for the area. So every piece of a commercial environment is really attractively done. Roof lines, lighting, signage package as part of development, on-site landscaping, both interior parking lot, perimeter parking lot, buffer treatment, building foundational landscaping, stormwater management, and low-impact design practices, as opposed to, again, green engineering on site versus gray engineering on site. And then specific design guidelines, those are all general. All commercial sort of has to abide by those guidelines. And then more specifically, we have specific guidelines for the Archer Avenue site and the Mid-Iron site. These are more auto-oriented types of commercial, a little bit more intense, so they have different design guidelines for those areas. Again, massing, height, material, access, a little bit different. And then we get into the commercial area that's called the golf course, resort, and town center area. This is not as intense, not as big, it's more pedestrian scaled, a much more walkable environment. You have a lot more detail, it's more tactile from like grade up to about 20 feet, because that's what you perceive as you walk around. So a different set of guidelines of what massing, landscaping, orientation, what these outdoor areas could look like. But if Cog Hill develops this sort of golf course, resort, town center type of an area with boutiques, restaurants, galleries, shops, open to anybody and everybody, this is sort of the environment that could be created in that environment. And then lastly is this potential business park. It's this area, again, at the north end where Archer and Comment Easement hit. It's a rectangular area up there, perfectly suited because of where the location is and access to the site and unified ownership. It's a really likely candidate for like an office park or a research campus. It could be nestled into the site, really compatible with residential, big setbacks, campus-like setting. Could be a nice employment type of use to have in the area. So we've given some examples of what the massing, building orientation, placement, parking should be for this triangular piece if it's developed as a business park type of a use. Again, the plan also accommodates for this potentially being residential. Could be either. It's sort of the one pivot piece of the plan. But again, landscaping, campus amenities, what that would look like. So again, and then the appendix just sort of identifies the map that shows the area that are referenced in the design guidelines. This is that office park potential area up there in the triangle. So again, that's the extent of the presentation, but the thing that's important is the area was annexed several years ago. The area is now part of the village. The plan was adopted 14 months ago after a year-long plus process, open houses, online, public hearings to get it tweaked, revised just right and get that adopted. Now that it is adopted, there's a desire to have further guidance with which to evaluate and review proposals when they come forward. Those are the design guidelines. And because this is a unique approach to sort of conservation design in the environment that doesn't affect sort of the existing zoned areas of the village, we created a new zoning category, the Western Growth Area Planned Unit Development District, which puts all these different procedural requirements in place for any development for that area of the village only. So it's a new zoning package. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you, but that is sort of how these three documents work and the two documents we have this evening to talk about.
Okay, thank you, John. If any of the commissioners would like to ask John some questions, do that before I open it to the public hearing. If not,
Yeah,
Go ahead, Dan.
I just have a couple. With in fact Cog Hill, the conversation, has there been a conversation thus far with them wanting to move forward on that type of development on their golf course? Or is this something that we're just kind of, it's a great idea, yes, and we're hoping it's going to happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the year-long plus process to develop the plan, so that's already established. We met with all the property owners. Some of them had plans, some of them did not have plans. Some had plans that were developed a long time ago that were sort of abandoned, but there were some ideas. Nobody came in and said, this is the type of residential we for sure want. They don't know it. This is not going to be built tomorrow. There's no bulldozers waiting. There's no plans made. This is the long play. All right, this is a 10, 20, 30-year play, given market. So we don't know what's going to be proposed. We're trying to be ready for it. So they did indicate, and again, I'll go over what we went over when the plan was developed. I'm not speaking Cog Hill, but what we sort of talked about. There are some thoughts of trying to accommodate and sort of transform Cog Hill into a national golf resort destination. All right, so you might go on vacation with your wife and kids. You want to go someplace for a week. You'd have restaurants, a place for the kids to hang out, golfing during the day, restaurants at night, sort of a golf resort destination. You could stay in a villa on the golf course while you were there that week, or you might come here with a group of business folks that you work with. But it's a golf resort destination, and because of that, if that's where they end up going, there would need to be more than just a clubhouse. Where would they eat? What would the boutiques be like? What would the spa be like? What would the retail amenities be like? And it wouldn't just be for Cog Hill. It would be around where their clubhouse is, but it'd be open to anybody and everybody. It'd be open to the public. It's not a gated shopping area. So they did indicate a desire to maybe explore something like that in the future. So we wanted to figure out where it should go and what it should look like or framed like if it came to fruition. So I know there's an interest in maybe pursuing something like that as Cog Hill sort of repositions itself a little bit going forward, yes.
And if they decide 10 years down the road, you know what, the climate's changed, we're not feeling it, or the PGA didn't give them exactly what they wanted to host PGA tournaments there. What happens to that property then? They could just kind of flip it?
Well, they couldn't flip it again. The planned unit development ordinance is in place, or hopefully will be in place soon. That would govern the regulatory procedures through which development would be entitled. So they're still bound by that. So they couldn't just do something. It would have to be approved by the village in a public hearing process. The guiding documents for anything that the village may consider is still the Western Growth Area Master Plan and the design guidelines. So if at a future date, because of market conditions, they wanted to pivot, like anybody proposing anywhere in the United States, they could come in and try to make their case. And you might say 12 years from now, 12 years ago when we adopted this, it was perfect, but this shift in the market is something nobody anticipated. And it's never going to be X, Y, or Z what it used to be. And what you're proposing is fantastic. I wish we could have thought of it 12 years ago, but the market wasn't there. This would be phenomenal to have here. You can recalibrate later depending on market conditions. So nothing is set in stone. And the village always has the ability to change something in the future if they want to. And villages routinely change zoning or plans if they have to. They don't do it on a whim or in a reactionary state. But if things change significantly, say 20 years from now, or 10, 12 years from now, you have the ability to modify this either proactively or in response to a developer who comes forward, provided the onus is on them to make their case. But you're still guided by them. So this is based off of market. A ton of market research went into this to make sure, based on projections, what was likely to be viable going forward. So this is not done arbitrarily or ambiguously. A lot of research went in to making sure this plan reflected market viabilities and projected market viabilities for all these use categories.
Oh, so Cog Hill did that?
We did that.
We did that.
Cog Hill did not do that, we did that. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, I get it. It's just something about the commercial development. Are we, you know, I mean, I hate to say it, there's nobody up here that's more happy not to be wearing a mask right now. But moving forward on the commercial development, and as, you know, I wasn't here for your description last week, but I did, in fact, watch it on YouTube. You were talking about little boutique shops, smaller shops, small restaurant-style white cloth, I think you said, tables. Is there going to be anything in that building plan that, you know, going forward, that if there is something like this ever again, we can at least go into it knowing that we're not going to have to just close them down immediately?
Yeah, boy, that's a crystal ball I wish I had. I'd be working for the next administration, whoever that might be. No one saw like the 08 crash coming either. You know, the housing crash of 08. That really hit municipalities sort of like Q309 because there's a little bit of a lag. But it's bounced back in spades, different types of residential. It shifted a little bit. So when I talk about that type of restaurant, that type of environment, that's literally for that area around the Cog Hill Resort area, because that's a different type of setting. Along Archer or where Mid-Iron is, we're not expecting to be that type of development. There may be some great, there might not be, but that's not the environment that would likely be market viable or going for in those locations, because they're on major corridors. So I think the main thing that this pandemic has taught us is the ability to recalibrate or to be, I think, increasingly responsive. Look at how many communities in more urbanized areas very quickly pivoted to shutting down streets and letting restaurants have outdoor dining in the public rights of way. Most suburbs did that, and it really did a lot. I don't know that a plan this far out or an ordinance this far out would be able to recalibrate or anticipate those sorts of things. The PUD ordinance, though, because it's not strict regulations like an as-of-right district, we don't have to be as granular in what we can and cannot permit, which is why we have the public process to allow a little bit of creativity when an idea comes forward. So the zoning in a PUD allows for much more creative approaches and responsive approaches. And then I think we're just going to do that once development comes out of the ground to do that, again, case-by-case basis. I don't know there's anything you can do too proactively about that.
You know, and when you were talking about building monotony, when other municipalities build subdivisions, that I've seen, you'll have one style of house, and then another style of a house, then another style of house, and then it kind of repeats itself. What is the framework for that monotony? Are you going to allow a certain one blueprint per every 10 houses, or is it, can you use that same blueprint 4 houses down, but just change some of the colors?
No, we don't get into dictating architecture. We've written anti-monotony clauses in different communities, depending on what they've sort of let us know they were comfortable with or not comfortable with, that really focus on anti-monotony. So we can get to where that is. So that really got to across the street, either side, or kitty corner across the street could not be the same building, just inverted, or the same building with a different color. It had to be a different building. And then when you got beyond that, it could be the same one if it had to be inverted or mirrored with different building materials. Maybe the gables were different. So unless you were looking for it, you wouldn't know it was the same thing. So we're not expecting that in a subdivision, let's say there is one of 50 homes, you're going to get 50 different homes. You might. I live in a neighborhood that's 100 years old. Every house is different. You don't see that anymore. But through architecture, through materials, through parapets, through roof lines, through distribution, you'd never know it was the same one over and over again. And it's incumbent upon the developer to do that. Now, what I would expect to see in some of these areas is some of these may very well develop where the house isn't proposed upon development approval. the applicant may very come in and say, we're doing a 50 lot, sort of a subdivision over here. It's gonna be beautiful landscape, big lots, wooded areas over here, a lot of natural open space. We've planted out where the lots are gonna go on the heavily wooded streets. The setbacks are gonna be 20 feet off the front, 10 feet off the side. Houses have to be a minimum of 2,800 square feet. And we're gonna let people buy the lot and build the house they want with their architect, provided they meet these minimum quality standards or size standards. And then you'll get whatever people want to do for their house. So you may get developers coming in here that aren't proposing individual homes. They could set the stage for people who buy the lot and build a home their own. We've seen that in Palos Park, out west, where subdivisions are created, the homes aren't proposed. That's done later through as of right, provided they meet those standards. So if a developer is proposing to come in here and build them, they have to demonstrate what that architectural template or menu is, and how monotony will be fought against or instituted so it's not done. So that's incumbent upon the developer. We don't dictate exactly what that has to be.
And, you know, in the auspice of not dictating architecture, it does say in here that there's no modern style homes allowed.
Where does it say that?
It says modern architectural style should not be permitted on lots smaller than half an acre.
Okay.
I was going to question that.
And we can take that out if we want. That went through sort of like this, I think there was a notion to have something a bit more traditional, building materials. If modern architecture is done correctly, I absolutely love it. The challenge with a lot of modern architecture is because it lacks a lot of the intricacies of like bricks and mortar and a lot of, angles or parapets. Sometimes it's very linear and very simple, all right? That's stunning if the fit and finish is perfect and the materials are high quality. If it's not, it looks cheap. But if there was a desire to pull that out, I'm fine with that. So that was sort of in response to some of the public feedback and commentary you had for more traditional types of architecture. But that's not a personal thing or professional thing. I think modern architecture can be stunning if it's done well. So, and I know we've got some architects or architect on the commission. So if we want to eliminate that line, that's fine with me. So that sort of came as a response to public feedback.
Okay, because a lot of that to me looks like modern architecture.
Well, when you live in a 120-year-old house, Dan.
Well, I know that, but I mean, still, within Palos Park. I mean, if you're going down the streets of Palos Park, seeing a house that's similar to the one even on the same block is kind of slim to none. Don't see that far too often.
I would consider this to be maybe contemporary. I would not consider this to be modern, but I will defer to, I'm not an architect. I just pretend to be in public hearings. So I'll let the architect speak about modern versus contemporary versus,
Dan, are you finished?
I just had one other question about the building containers, about repurposing a shipping container to use as a, like say, an on-site office for the many of us that most likely will never return back to an office. And a 120-year-old home doesn't really afford you that kind of interior space. It says that those aren't going to be allowed. Are there variants of that? And I'm not an architect, but they are repurposed. They are removable.
right. And let me state this. So the guidelines are guidelines. It is not regulatory, right? So it's not shall, must. It is should not, should consider. It's their guidelines. So if someone comes up and makes a case, you can say, we wouldn't want these all over the place, but where this is located, behind the mature stands and trees, serves a great purpose, fits in great, it's not sort of dictating the character. I think in this case, I understand the guidelines, this could be something good. They would have to make their case, you would have to state your findings as to why it was okay. This does not prevent that from happening. It may raise the bar for them to say why it should be considered. But this does not, the guidelines do not in and of themselves regulate out the ability to propose or approve those. It's not a shall or an absolute.
Also, if there's any language in here that
I think
you
it says
disagree
no.
with, then we can strike that.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's part of the process.
Are there any more questions from the board before I open this to the public hearing?
Well, just one question. There was something else about sheds on lots smaller than a third of an acre, I think. And And again, these are guidelines, just as Dan was talking
Right.
about, so that's all it is.
Yep.
So it has to go through review.
Everything, yeah, nothing here. And again, and this is the challenge of writing an ordinance or a plan. You cannot, an ordinance that gets written, if you got an ordinance that works for 95% of situations, that's a pretty good ordinance. I mean, that's pretty rock solid. But it's why your ordinance has procedures for variances. Because they know something's gonna come up, they're like, well, we didn't have thought of that, we gotta figure out how to deal with this situation. Likewise, when planning or design guidelines, you cannot foresee future building trends or materials. You cannot foresee every absolute situation. So what we created here is a process that is guiding, policies that provide direction and foundation, and a regulatory procedure which accommodates flexibility given quality and character. So we built in or tried to bake in that necessary flexibility, but you'll never get something that's airtight on every proposal. And that is the burden of being an elected or appointed official. You have to interpret those 5% where it doesn't quite fit. And there's sort of no way around it. But going to what Lauren said, if there's something in there you think is better, where the language gets modified or restricted, then we'll modify or restrict it. So,
And one other question, Dan's question about where it says shall not use these container type things. Is that subject to a variance as well? Even though it says shall not, could somebody then bring it up and say, well, it says I can't do it, but this is why I think I should be able to use it?
yeah, not a variance. A variance is a very specific legal procedure, okay? There's case precedent, it's a legal procedure. When a zoning ordinance has to be amended and you want to seek regulatory relief from the underlying standards of a zoning district. That's what a variation is. Part of the procedures of variations is findings of fact. One of the findings of fact you have to find is that a hardship exists. That if you adhere strictly to the underlying zoning standards, you are putting an undue burden or hardship on that property owner because as applied to that unique property, strict interpretation and application of the standard is a hardship, all right? That's a finding. This is a guideline. This is not an ordinance. So if someone comes in and makes their case and you approve the PUD, say, like, yeah, you know, we're gonna approve it, they don't have to go through a separate thing for a variance. It would be called a site development allowance. It could be part of the public hearing. It's not a separate procedure. They don't have to meet the threshold of a hardship. It's just if you think it's right or not.
Okay, so if I'm reading this right then, it says on page 4 here, second dot down, development of single-family homes should consist of traditional architectural styles. Modern architectural styles should not be permitted on lots smaller than 1/2 acre. In addition, shipping container homes should not be permitted at any scale of development. So they're done.
Well, no, so this is not a regulatory document. The PUD ordinance.
These are not rules, these are just guidelines.
They're guidelines. The PUD ordinance is the regulatory document, and it's incredibly flexible because the developer can request allowances or deviations from the village codes and ordinances.
Yeah.
They just have to justify those
Right.
requests and explain the purpose behind the request, and sometimes mitigate the request through additional site design features.
Landscaping, whatever.
Yeah, so this is just to, the language and the guidelines are just to give the developer the idea of what the expectation is. If they want to deviate, then they have to do a little bit more work to justify the
And
deviation.
in fact, the application requirement, one of the line item requirements in the application for submittal is to identify any site development allowance you are requesting that deviates from the ordinance for which you would want to get, you know, you've got to identify what those are and say why you think it's a good idea to make your case. But you've got to identify those on the front end of your application. So when it comes to, you'll have a sheet, requested site development allowances, you'll say, okay, you're asking for 4 things that aren't consistent. Let's talk about the 4 things where you want to deviate, and then you talk about it. They have to identify those and make the case. But it's part of the larger process. Approved as one package.
Are there any more questions?
Two quick things. I would be in favor of getting rid of the bias against modern architecture.
Okay.
Overall, this is a great document. If you're designing homes, you don't want to be put into a box and told by a planner what not to design, and this does not do that. So, thank you for that.
You got it?
one super nitpicky thing.
Nitpick away.
Page 33, the second image is a precast building, and we say you can't use precast.
Good, look at you go. Which page is that?
33.
Oh, that's right.
Is this in the, this is all.
It's in the commercial area.
This is a good, no, this is a good point.
It's not a bad precast building.
And I guess the question is, I'm glad you brought that up, because I guess the question here for this group is the photo wrong because it shows precast, or is the requirement to not have precast wrong in the photo there?
In my opinion, it would be absolutely totally wrong to not permit precast.
I agree 100%. That's the answer I was looking for. So I think this is not the right way to go here. In the last even like 5 or 6 years, I've seen precast that is stunning. So I agree. I think the photo is good. I think the no precast is the problem. So I would change the text out the photo.
I think we actually might have contradictory language, because we do later, in other parts of the document, permit high-quality
Tilt up for
precast products.
precast. We'll double check that, because
I didn't
On the
catch
side and
this.
the rear.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
I didn't catch that.
I didn't either, and I'm glad, that's not nitpicky, that's what you guys are reviewing, this. The more sets of eyes, the better. You can read something 100 times and you'll miss something,
But I would agree with Phil on that concept. I mean, office research park, that's going to be one of the more efficient and attractive ways to build.
you're talking this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree 100%, 100%. I live in River Forest, and Concordia University a few years ago did a new dormitory. And they were gonna do it precast and come in just like a 4-story dormitory. It's stunning. It looks like brick and limestone, and it's absolutely, even you go up to it, I mean, it's gorgeous. And the construction time, the quality, it's fantastic. So I agree 100%, we should not preclude or even discourage precast in the business park. I agree 100%.
Any more questions from the board?
I would like to just offer just an observation. I think there's been some confusion about this whole process from the beginning. And I think perspective is really, really important. He's already said tonight that this is not regulatory. These aren't rules and regulations that everybody has to abide by. It's great that we've got a quality document, because if you can imagine a developer, and by the way, everybody needs to remember, this whole development is going to be market driven. The village isn't going to build anything. We're not going to build anything. It's going to be developers coming forth with their ideas of what they would like to build. And guess what? If they don't think they can make money at it, we're never going to see that plan. So at least we've got a document here that says, this is sort of the way we want you to go about it. But if you got different ideas, market changes, we're all ears. Talk to us. But at least come forward. So if you can imagine a developer coming forth with an idea, a scheme, and we don't even have anything like this, what are we supposed to say? I mean, that's what this is all about. Perspective is we're laying the groundwork for a huge potential development in the future that is going to absolutely be market driven. And at least we're prepared. We're not going to go changing anything in our homes, on my street, your street, whatever. This is all about new stuff, and at least we've got some guidelines, and well-developed guidelines, but they're not rules.
I think it was perfectly stated, that's exactly right.
Okay, we've now heard from John in his presentation. We've had comments from the full board. Now I'd like to open up the meeting to the public portion of this, the public meeting, public hearing. And here I would ask any residents or whoever to, if you would like to speak, come up to the microphone, give your name, address, and present your comment or question, and we'll take them all down at once. We're not going to respond individually, we'll do it as a group at the very end, responding to you to save time and also any chance of repeating or going over something. We'll try to do it all as a group or as a block. So if anybody would like to come up to the microphone, please do now. If you have any comments, questions on what was just said or presented. I guess no one wants to come up. Okay?
I'll say that.
I would like to add, I really mean this. This is a great start. No kidding. And we should all be thankful that somebody had the foresight to put this kind of thing in motion. At least we now have a really good foundation for potential major development in this community.
Thank you, Bill. Did you have a comment?
No, I was just going to say, just sort of keeping track of notes, just in my head, I know you'll probably recap them afterwards, but just to clarify what I've heard so far from the Planning Commission is removal of any sort of deterrence of modern architecture and removal of anything that might discourage or say we're not in favor of, in the business park area, the tilt-up type of precast
Right.
stuff. And those are the two things that I've heard so far.
What about precast in the commercial areas?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay,
Okay,
Good.
so,
Right. Since there's been no comment from the audience, any further comment, I will close the public portion of this and bring it back to the board for consideration. Any further comments and make motions on both of these proposals?
so in the, on page 34 of the commercial areas business park guidelines, the last bullet states tilt-up concrete precast panels are not allowed except for rear facades. If used on any other side, it needs to be augmented with brick or stone veneer and must exhibit high-quality craftsmanship material and installation. So I think that captures our discussion this evening. Am I correct?
Yes.
No.
Okay, and
No.
so we'll just
No,
mirror
that's
that for the other commercial
we'll make
areas.
sure it's consistent.
Yeah, well, the way this is written is not at all what I just heard.
Okay,
And we didn't say it could only be in the rear. We didn't say you had to put the brick on the front.
I agree, we didn't put stipulations on it.
I think this is way too,
Prescriptive.
absolutely.
You want to scratch the whole paragraph, the whole bullet?
I would.
We can put something in there that if precast or tilt-up is going to be used, it has to be of high quality, we can put some stuff in there that doesn't preclude it or discourage it, but set sort of a standard for it.
It can't be a flat precast panel.
Yeah, there's something like that, there's gotta be some articulation or interest built into, most is now anyway, so.
Yeah.
And again, I do this for a living. I mean, the marketing and stuff like this, and nobody's gonna bring anything in here that they don't think they can sell or lease.
Absolutely.
It's gonna have to be beautiful, or we're never gonna see it. So I don't worry nearly as much about little things like this as some might, because you can go to any business park around here, if they're built in the last 20 years, they'll look great. And there's a reason, because the guys that build it and own it want to be able to lease it.
The precast stuff is looking a lot better than all the last 3 years.
It's
Can't tell the
It's
difference.
fantastic. I agree. So we'll work on that and take away the restrictions or the prescriptive
And
language.
getting back now, there was a comment on page 4, bulletproof, or bullet number, the second one down. Are we scratching that whole thing? Is that what, or modifying it?
That's the modern architecture
And
and shipping container homes.
delete that full bullet.
So it was page 4, the
page
It's the
4,
second bullet.
second bullet down.
development of single-family homes should consist of traditional architectural styles, or architectural styles should be, not be permitted, should be container homes. I think we don't need that. I think we got enough other quality material, other components. I think I would suggest we strike that bullet.
I would agree. I think if somebody brought a shipping container development to our meeting, they'd probably get thrown out on the rear.
Yeah.
Unless they recognize precast.
I've got to tell you though, I see some shipping container stuff, both commercial and residential, that's, again, like modern architecture. If it's done right, it can be pretty stunning. If it's done poorly, it looks like someone just fell off the back of a truck.
John, did you say that we have a minimum size dwelling in this
I
document?
was just going to ask that, if I may.
Go
I didn't realize we were discussing the ordinance at the same time, but
Yeah.
1273.06 of the design standards, there's minimum and in some case maximum size units as well as minimum and maximum densities. I'm just curious where that was derived from or what was used to establish those.
I think the village, and again, Lauren may be able to comment, I think the village has existing minimum standards right now for different types of dwellings.
Yeah,
And I think part of this was to carry that forward. Again, if they wanted to seek relief from this, they could do that as a site development allowance as part of the package, and sort of say why what they were proposing was the right thing to do, so. And again, we could very well take these out if you didn't think it was necessary.
I don't know that it's not appropriate, I was just curious what it was based on. I mean, I don't remember the ordinance exactly, but I want to say the minimum single-family home is more like 2,200, something like that, not 4,000,
It's in our,
current zoning ordinance.
yeah.
And maybe this is appropriate, because we're looking for different styles of.
Right. And that's part of, and I'll tell you where some of this came from. Part of what we had to do here, when we did the plan, is we had to try to get our arms around the current and projected market viability for several different types of residential product types. And a lot of that residential product type in the marketplace is predicated on unit price or sale price in the market, construction per square foot, et cetera. So when we did that market analysis and when you look at the plan document itself, one of the things that we do in here is we identify the different types of residential product. And we sort of talk in here the different types of, typical square footage, sort of the typical range. And again, it's not set in stone, but it gives you an idea. So there's several pages in here that talks about townhomes and row houses, cottage homes, multifamily, senior housing. And so for things like traditional single-family detached, patio homes, large lot, townhomes, cottage homes, it's a vernacular a lot of people aren't used to. So we describe what that is. We give some photographs to give you an indication of what type of product we're talking about. This is what some of the market you'll see.
But
And then-
within these guidelines, these are, we're establishing something, but you can come up with a different proposal and explain.
Correct.
Okay, so we're not saying you can't build an apartment bigger than 1,600 square feet.
Correct, and a lot of that dovetails with the research we did to try to demonstrate a range of product type, because for the first time we were trying to accommodate a range or a menu of residential product type we weren't dictating or didn't know.
Okay,
So that's what I think.
thank you.
Where does it, or does it define what a single-family estate is as opposed to a traditional single-family detached? I didn't see that. I'm sure it's in here. I didn't see it.
No, it's on page 27. Single-family estate, and then it gives, again, 0.5 to 2 units per acre. So again, we're trying to, when we did the market research and try to explain this vernacular of product type, we had to give some ranges for what we were talking about. So we're talking on page
Of the comprehensive plan.
27, I'm sorry, not the design guidance. It goes back to, this is the plan that was adopted 14 months ago. And in here, you'll talk about a typology of different housing that we might see. And to educate the reader or the developer, we sort of explain photographs, give some density ranges. Just, again, it's not regulatory, but as the plan document tries to create a menu of product we may see. We may not, but we might. So that's what that does.
I guess I'm just, now that Rich has brought this up, how would a developer or a single family or a homeowner who's bought a lot, how would they distinguish between a single family estate and a traditional single family detached?
It would be the size of the lot and what the developer is saying it is. So if the developer came in and said these are 1 acre lots, that would be a estate, would fall into that category. And if a developer came in, and let's say a developer came in and platted a new subdivision, like back in the woods, and they were 1/2 acre lots, they would have to plat out the street, plat out the lots, and then when you saw it on a plan, you'd see the lots, and then within each lot, you'd see a dotted building envelope. And that would reflect the setbacks and where the building envelope was of the house. So when you buy a lot, you know that. So since there isn't going to be an underlying strict as a right zoning district, the developer who proposes the subdivision would lay out the lots, and then as part of the subdivision would show where the development envelope was in each one, where the setbacks. And then in most subdivisions, when you buy something like that, they say, hey, if you're going to buy one of these lots, know that your house has to be a minimum of X. I mean, that's often the case. So because they want to get sort of a rhythm or a threshold of what that product's going to look like, so there's fair certainty to the next buyer of what the quality is going to be. So
That's usually approved as part of the PUD.
the PUD would approve the lots, and it would approve the setbacks, And if they said there are gonna be restrictions on here as to how big these homes could be or the range, that would be one of those covenants that were provided to record, so you knew what development would come out as of right later, provided it met those. Yeah. And that's standard fare for higher end or nicer residential development of small lots to big lots. That's standard practice.
All right, thank you, John. Well, we have to vote on 2 amendments tonight, if we care to.
We need
First
separate
one is
motions.
2 separate motions?
2 separate motions. The design and development guidelines, and then second was the planned unit development district. Do I have a motion
Motion?
for the first one, for the design development guidelines?
I make a motion to recommend approval of PC 2021-05, proposed amendment to Chapter 1222, Official Village Comprehensive Plan of the Village Code, to revise the comprehensive plan adopted on December 7, 2009, and to add the Western Growth Area Master Plan Design and Development Guidelines as an official document, subject to the revisions discussed at this meeting.
Second.
Are we all clear on the revisions we talked about? Okay.
No shipping containers.
Motion.
Unless they're really nice.
Okay.
Commissioner DeBoer.
Gold
Yes.
fixtures, gold fluxes.
Commissioner McCarthy.
Yes.
Commissioner Wagler.
Yes.
Commissioner Creedence.
Yes.
And Chair Larson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, the next one to vote on is the planned unit development ordinance. Anybody like to make a motion?
I'll make this one too, unless anyone wants to take a turn.
You're good.
Okay.
You're good.
I make a motion to recommend approval of PC 2021-06, proposed amendment to Title VI zoning to replace Chapter 1273S-1, Planned Unit Development District repeal, with a new Chapter 1273 WGA-PUD, Western Growth Area, Planned Unit Development District.
Do I hear a second?
I'm good at that. Second.
Okay.
I have a question.
Any comments?
I have a question. I'm going to pick some nits here for 1 second.
Take away.
I don't understand, I'm still on this
Table?
table that he was referencing earlier. The single-family estate, the minimum density per net acre, 0.5. How do you build half a house?
Net density is calculated per acre basis. If it's
this
0.5,
means
it's a 2-acre lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, but that's how density is recorded in regulations. So that's a benefit. So you're not building a half a house, you're building a house on 2 acres. The net density is 0.5 per acre, or 1 unit for every 2 acres. But it's a per acre density calculation. So that's the 0.5.
But it's also, could be a half acre lot.
Correct, that's
From
the
a
range.
half to 2 acres.
Right. Correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any more commentary or comments? In that case, Lauren, we have to call it roll.
Commissioner DeBoer.
Yes.
Commissioner McCarthy.
Yes.
Commissioner Wagler.
Yes.
Commissioner Creedence.
Yes.
Chair Larson.
Yes. Okay. The next item is other business. I don't think there is any other business tonight with the board. If there isn't, the next item is any citizens and visitors comment. If there isn't, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So maybe do this one.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it.
Present.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. And thank you for all the work you do.
It's,
This really provides flexibility. It doesn't affect what we are now.